In this presentation, I'm going to go over the lesson plan for following the Fink model for developing a lesson. If you are doing a teaching method using the spectrum of teaching, Mauston's spectrum of teaching, you don't need to listen to this presentation. Again, this is for if you're doing Mauston's teaching styles, you use a different lesson plan template, and I have a presentation about that. So again, this is for everybody else who's not using one of Mauston's teaching styles for your teaching lesson and the lesson that you're going to do. As a reminder, for the signature assignment in our class, you will actually develop a lesson, and then to do that, you need to actually develop a lesson plan, like your goal, your in coaching, they have coaching plans, good coaches do at least. And so that's what we're going to have here is a lesson plan that you're going to use to help you teach the lesson that you'll teach. So I have several different items that I'm going to be showing you. I have the lesson plan template, which is I have on the screen now. Then I have the kind of a guide for that lesson plan where I provide some description to help you, and then I've provided a lesson example. So I'm going to go to the lesson example. So you're going to provide a title for your lesson plan, make it fun. This is not the example lesson I have here is not the greatest lesson in the world, and it's not the worst lesson in the world. It's okay. I picked this particular lesson plan because nobody will actually use this teaching method because I don't have it in as an one of the possibilities for you in this class. So the situational factors are all the things that, let's go back to our what are the situational factors? What are the information do we need to know about our athletic training students? What materials, equipment, technology do you need? Will this lesson be in a classroom, laboratory, clinical setting? What do your students need to do before the lesson? So if we go back to our example, this is the situational factor is prerequisite in first aid. Learning athletic training students must have had a passing grade in first aid, prerequisite in healthcare administration. And so I'm not going to read all these things. How long the lesson is going to be, one 90-minute lab section. This lesson section would be in a practicum class because it's in learning over time, which is a type of teaching theory. And so then what's the learning environment? Is it a lab? Is it a classroom setting? Is it a clinical setting? And then all you need to do is provide the teaching method. If you're going to use, again, I'll say this several times, this is for everything that is not using Mauston's spectrum of teaching. So let's say you're doing a 1-minute preceptor. You just put that there. Student preparation. What do the students need to do in order to come to class prepared? So let's go here. Wrong place, over here. Student preparation. Students should have passed first aid. Students should pass blah, blah, blah. So they've provided bullet points. You don't have to explain a lot of things. Just to the point. The next one is going to be a little bit more detailed. The student learning outcomes, objectives. Same words, outcomes, objectives mean the same thing. Earlier in the class, you have identified the content area that your lesson's going to focus on. You've identified the outcome, expected outcome. And this is copied and pasted straight from the NATA educational competencies and correctly cited. So I'm not going to read it. It just says there. And then we're going to develop a learning objective from the expected outcome. So I'm going to go back over to my template, and I believe this is also in the guide. So when we develop our student learning objectives or outcome, we're going to make sure that you're going to follow a specific language. I want you to write a certain way, which I have covered in another lecture earlier in this class. So you'll begin the outcome, the SLO, I'm just going to use that SLO, with the student will be able to. This is the goal. This is what the student will be able to do by the time they complete this lesson. And so you're going to use an action verb to describe the thing that students will do. You're going to use either Bloom's or Fink's taxonomy. I provided the Bloom's verbs, and we talked about Fink's taxonomy in another presentation. Then you provide the condition. This is the setting that the students will exhibit upon the outcome, the practical exam. I'm going to give you an example. What is the expected level of performance to demonstrate the proficiency? 7 out of 10. So let's take a look here. The student will be able to identify, explain, and perform. So those are verbs. That's what they need to be able to do. That's the behavior. The recommended or required components of a pre-participation examination. So this is the condition. All this is the condition and where it's going to be done as in a lab setting, with a score of 80% or greater on their lab handout and reflection. So this is the criteria for mastery. Now I'm going to give you another example of a learning outcome or a learning objective. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of them. Okay, so again, this is a content area, evidence-based practice, from our NATA educational competencies. The expected outcome is defined evidence-based practice as it relates to athletic training clinical practice, cited. I forgot to put a period there, period. Then the SOLO in the format that I want it. You don't need to put the verb and all the stuff I haven't read and what you turn in. I'm just trying to show what those are. Okay, the student will be able to define, that's the verb, and they're going to define evidence-based practice as it relates to athletic training clinical practice. That's the behavior. And that quotation then is in the wrong place. With a score of 80% or greater, that's the criteria for mastery on a written examination. Okay, so that's the criteria. That's the verb. I'm going to show you another SLO. This is actually from our syllabus. The student will be able to develop, this is a verb, this is application, analysis, or synthesis. That's the type of verb it is. We'll be able to develop strategies that synthesize current. Actually, this can be a verb too. This can be a verb. Athletic training and higher education literature on learning theory and motivation in order to actively engage all learners and produce optimal learning. That's the behavior. That's a lot of behaviors. With a score of 80% or greater, the criteria of mastery on the athletic training lesson presentation assignment. So that's from our, actually now it would be, we got rid of the term presentation. So that is the mastery. Now, criterion, I've talked about this in another lecture, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. Criterion of mastery is how good do you want your students to be when they finish. Okay. The verb is what they should do, and behavior is what they're on what. What are they doing on? What are they going to do during that behavior? All right, so we should then provide our equipment, materials, or technologies needed. So let's go back to our completed lesson. So for this lesson, the teacher needs all these different things here. Just everything that you equipment, technology needs, anything that you need for the class. Then your lesson is a detailed explanation of the lesson. You should have a minimum of introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Another teacher should be able to use this lesson plan and be able to actually do the lesson by just reading your lesson. I don't think this is detailed enough in my opinion. I think it might be better maybe to make a table and be more specific. Again, this is probably a B example, but I picked it because nobody else in this class will use this particular teaching method. So the goal is to be as detailed as possible with doing this lesson. Provide an introduction, the body is the main point, and the conclusion. Your time should equal whatever you say it's going to be above. You said it's a 90-minute. You should make sure that you have 90 minutes of material. And make sure that you've counted for every time that you're transitioning or the students are coming in, doing an introduction, whatever you're doing in that 90 minutes that you're doing this lesson. You're going to include the assessment. This is going to be included not in your first rough draft, because we're going to talk about that in our next class, but I'll just go over that here. You're going to provide assessment. You can have both formal, informal, and will be summative. So you can assess. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. Sorry about that. I want it to be the guide here. Sorry about that. So assessment, how will you know that the students have met the student learning objectives that you have? Will you have formal or informal assessment? And will the assessment be formative or summative? And you don't have to actually provide, like if you're going to say they're going to be on a written exam, you don't have to provide a written exam, but you just have to explain how you would actually do the assessment. You don't have to provide the assessment for this. Again, next week you'll turn in your second draft of your lesson plan. The first draft is all the way up to the assessment. Then next week you'll turn in everything with after I've given you feedback, then you'll update the assessment, because in the next week's class we go over a whole bunch of stuff about assessment, and that'll help you deal with assessment here. So again, just a rough overview of the lesson plan following Fink, which again, most of you, if you are not following Boston's spectrum of teaching, you're not doing one of those teaching styles, then you'll use this lesson plan. As always, if you have questions, please ask.